Okay, good.
Okay. Können Sie schon meine Präsentation sehen?
Ja.
Ja, okay.
Aber also bei mir lädt es noch. Es zeigt mir, dass du deinen Bildschirm geteilt hast, aber ich kann die Präsentation noch.
Die ist da, also ich sehe sie.
Ja, die ist da.
Okay, noch einen Moment.
Jetzt ist es aber weg.
Ja, kommt wahrscheinlich.
Ja.
Jetzt.
Okay.
Moment.
Ja.
Gut.
Okay, hallo alle. Ich bin super entspannt, hier zu sein, online. Und ja, heute fangen wir auf Englisch, weil ich so lange auf Deutsch nicht gesprochen habe. Ja. Und heute das Thema ist Language Queer Activism, How to Keep Languages Safe from Imperialism. And I'm not sure if I'm gonna actually answer the question, how to keep languages safe from imperialism, because I believe there is no really a way of doing that. But I would talk more about the practices that are done right now in two regions such as Kazakhstan and Tatarstan. And I will talk a little more on my own perspective. Yeah, let me introduce first myself. So my name is Marsel Ganeyev, and I did my bachelor's in chemical engineering. I did my master's in biofabrication, and right now I'm doing my PhD in medical science. So I'm quite far away academically from the area of linguistics or like in languages in that case, but I am a polyglot, so I speak quite many languages. And I come originally from south of Kazakhstan. My hometown is called Kintau. And ethnically, as you probably know in Russian-speaking world, it's quite important to mention who you are ethnically, especially in the context of languages. I'm Russian, Kazakh, and Tatar. And I hold the citizenship of Kazakhstan. And the main goal of how this talk is going to be focusing on two regions, such as Kazakhstan and Tatarstan, because we'll be talking about two languages, Kazakh and Tatar mostly, about the language politics, more focusing on right now situation, and look at it through the prism of queerness, and it's going to be in the end. Yeah, because I'm also LGBTQI rights activist. So yeah, why it's important to say where you're from in Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan, as you know, it's a huge country. It's ninth biggest country in the world. So within Kazakhstan, there are many differences that people are facing depending from which region you're coming from. And here is the map of Kazakhstan. At school, we learned that Kazakhstan is 5 sizes of France. Like you literally learn it. It's kind of a fun fact. And yeah, here you can see the ethnic distribution. And in Kazakhstan, statistics-wise, it's very easy to follow which ethnic groups are living, because you can actually check how many Germans, Greeks, Russians, Kazakhs, Tatars are living in your hometown, for example. You can find Excel files with all that statistics. And so, yeah, that's how we can build this kind of beautiful maps of ethnic distribution within Kazakhstan.
Marcel,
yeah.
Excuse me. We don't see the maps that you say.
Wait.
It's not only me, it's others too. Maybe you can move. Yeah. 3 people say they don't see the map.
You don't see my presentation then?
Yeah, now it's good. It didn't move.
Okay, but now do you see it in the presentation mode or not?
Yes, I think.
No, not on a presentation mode.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try.
Yeah, right. This is not the presentation mode.
To share it again. I'll try to share it with this. Oh, I think this way it's much better. It should be, but I'm not sure if my media will work because I included lots of media material. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So here I
that's
was
much better.
presenting myself. Yeah, and I moved to the map. So here is actually the map of ethnic distribution in Kazakhstan, within Kazakhstan. And yeah, it's quite nice that in Kazakhstan you can actually have it. And if we look at it, that mostly Kazakh-speaking, ethnic Kazakh population are prevalently located in the South Kazakhstan and in the West Kazakhstan, while in the north we have Slavic majority in some of the places, although the change is shifting, and I will be talking on that more. And because of that, also the regional identity of people differs a lot within Kazakhstan itself. So it's really important to say where you are, because your language experience, your educational experience, your mental experience is going to be different because it really varies within the regions. And it's not only about Russians and Kazakhs, it's also about other ethnic minorities that live, some of them live more compactly. For example, Uyghurs live more compactly in the Almaty region, which is southeast. Uzbeks live more on the border with Uzbekistan in the south, and that's how we will see that influence. And to talk a little bit more about myself, I'm from a region of South Kazakhstan, so it's located here down in the east, and it's called Kintal. And what's interesting about this region is that about my hometown is the fact that it was built by Japanese prisoners of war. So after Second World War, there were some prisoners of war taken by Soviets. And here you see the monument of those Japanese prisoners of war who survived and went back to Japan and then came back in 90s and put this monument and took the remainings of those Japanese soldiers that died. Another fun fact is, like, not really fun, but but the fact is that my hometown was built by deported Greeks. So after the Second World War, a huge population of Greeks, Pontus Greeks, they were deported from the territory, from the territory of Crimea, and then from the territory of North Caucasus, North Caucasus and South Caucasus region, so from Georgia, Abkhazia, etc. And here you see in the middle the picture that I took actually this year, and I was in the mountains and I saw this cemetery, and it's actually written on it in Greek, so it's kind of surreal experience, because imagine you being in the mountains in the South Kazakhstan, with not that many people around, like some Kazakh villages, I would say, and there is a Greek cemetery written actually in Greek, and I asked my Greek friend to translate it to me. What does it say? And it says that the person who is buried there was born in Trabzon and died here. And Trabzon is a city in the North Turkey right now. So the person was originally from Osman Empire. And in the 90s, all those Greeks, they not all of them, but mostly they migrated to Greece because of very bad economical situation. And they still keep the community of Kazakh Greeks in Greece. So they organize some events and do things. And yeah, in the 90s, many of non-Greeks also moved to Greece because to find jobs, to find money. And there was actually a bus going directly from my hometown to Athens, and it would go 7 days. And the cost of it, I found it was 250 euros. And actually, my mom's friend, she actually did it to go there and work as a nanny. Why I'm explaining all of this? Because it's just like a small history of my hometown, but within Kazakhstan, there are many of these stories, and they're all super different and mixed. And language-wise, they're also very different. Because, so what is the effect of the fact that Greeks were deported to my hometown? And language-wise, and the effect is that my dad is using cursing words in Pontus Greeks. So he is actually cursing in Greek. And this is also funny how he integrates it with his Tatar Russian speech. And yeah, and it's not only him, it's the whole generation of people who lived very closely with those Greeks. And I'm gonna give two other examples of this weird mixed diversity within Kazakhstan. The next one is this video that I found when I was researching on the community of Karasaram. Karasaram are the Koreans that were deported from far east of Russia, so from Vladivostok region, from Sakhalin to Kazakhstan. And they were mostly deported to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And they built quite a big community within Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and they actually spoke Korean also. And yeah, let's just shortly watch this video, for not the whole video, but I'm gonna show some part. So it's a Russian woman who is speaking Karasaram. So she was living like very closely, and that exact village is located in, it's called Ushtobe. It's located in southeast Kazakhstan. And if we go within this video, then you see a Kazakh man who is also speaking Karasaram. Then you see a Kurdish woman who speaks fluent Karasaram. And it's actually amazing because she herself was deported. She is a Kurdish woman who was deported from the region of Batumi. I believe they were Yazidis, and they were deported also to Kazakhstan. And that a person who was deported learned the language of other deported people being within Kazakhstan. And yeah, it's a very big thing, I guess, to understand the complexity of language situation within Kazakhstan. And the last example that I want to give to you, which I think will be interesting for you, is Germans of Kazakhstan, Russo-Deutsche. Who they are, what they are, I guess most of you know, because you're pretty much connected to the Russian-speaking world of Germany. But yeah, here I just put some numbers for you to see. The Germans were deported to Kazakhstan during the Second World War because they were considered as someone who could ally with Hitler's army. So Soviets decided to move them all to Kazakhstan. Some of them are also deported to Siberia, but mostly they went to Kazakhstan. And these were not the first Germans who appeared in Kazakhstan at all. The first Germans came with Stolypin's reforms, because at that time they were giving away the lands in Kazakhstan, and they formed the villages, German villages in the North Kazakhstan. But their population was very small. It was up to 10,000. And here you see the numbers. So in 1939, it went from 2,600 to 92,000. Then it went to 650,000. Then it went in 1989 to almost 1 million. And then in 99, it went down to 353. And then in 2015, we already have 180. And after that, after around 2010, the number keeps being 180. So it doesn't really change. I'm not going to be talking a lot about those Germans because they have a huge history. How did they appear in Russian Empire in general? And yeah, what are the reasons for that? But I want to talk about them in the context of Kazakhstan. So actually there was the autonomy, Sozialistische Sowjetrepublik der Wolga-Deutsche, because they were mostly living in the Volga region. And and they moved there from 18th century, and so they had quite a huge history, and they were not blending with others. They were like living within the closed community, and they were keeping the dialects that they moved with, the dialects of those German regions they moved from, and they were speaking German. So then they were deported to Kazakhstan. Then their population, they struggled a lot. They struggled a lot until 1951. They had to report every week to the person like living in their city, saying that they did not move somewhere. And so they struggled a lot. But they still lived compactly within each other, even though it was quite stigmatized for them to speak German, as you imagine, after Second World War, all the stigma that they had. But they still kept it in a sense. And so Soviets, under the pressure, some kind of pressure of youth, in a sense, and the pressure of trying to look good for West Germany, they decided to create an autonomy, German autonomy within Kazakhstan. And they really tried. So they made a map for it. It was supposed to be on the modern territory of Astana region, so where the capital is right now, where the German population was the most dense. It didn't end up good because because Kazakhs were against of that. Can you imagine people who are living on your territory for like 40 years are suddenly forming the autonomy? And I wouldn't even say that Germans were pro that, because they didn't really feel that they need that in a sense. But still, it had a great effect on Kazakhstan too, because German speaking population is still quite big in Kazakhstan. Yeah, and also I want to talk a little about Andrei Braun. He has a very interesting biography, and he was a person who was supposed to be the head of this German autonomy within Kazakhstan. He was born in 1937 in Ukraine. Then when the fascist Germany came to Ukraine, they moved them to Poland. And then when Soviets won the war, they were deported to Kazakhstan. He lived he struggled a lot. They were a poor family. He was working in the fields. He barely finished school, but he made a great career in Soviets, up to the fact that he became a prime minister of agriculture within Kazakhstan. And then he was the one who was supposed to be the president of that so-called German autonomy within Kazakhstan. And after the Soviets collapsed, he remained in Kazakhstan, and he became the Akim, so the head of the city of Astana for some time, or Astana region, I don't really remember. So he had also a great career in Kazakhstan, but then he retired and he decided to move to Germany. And Germany was not giving him citizenship because Germany has a policy: if you succeeded in your career within Soviet Union, then you integrated too much within communism. So you are not you are exposed too much to communism, so they won't give you citizenship. Even though you are German, you are deported, like no one really cares. But part of his family moved to Germany, and they found the document saying that he was given a German citizenship by Hitler. So by Third Reich, he was given actually a German citizenship, and he had a paper saying that. And Germany could not say no, because officially, according to the law, if you're giving a citizenship in Germany at any point of time, you are supposed to have it. So yeah, that's how he moved to Bayreuth, which is a city in Bayern. And unfortunately, he died a week ago. When I did this research, I was a little devastated because he had a very interesting life. And I did my master's in Bayreuth. That's why for me, it was also interesting to learn about that. So yeah, these are like cool facts by me. But as I said, the autonomy was not accepted by Kazakhs, and it was one of the first big demonstrations in Soviet Kazakhstan. Then last fact that I want to add, not to go too long on it, after the collapse of Soviet Union, Germans of Russia and Kazakhstan, they actually tried to form German autonomy within Russia. So they wanted to get back this autonomy territory that they had within Volga region, and they went to Kremlin to talk to the president, but it did not work. They were not given it, but they still tried. And yeah, let's move further and now get more to the languages, right? To Tatar and Kazakh. So if we compare Kazakhstan and Tatarstan, they're extremely different in terms of size. Kazakhstan is super huge, Tatarstan is super small. But there are some things that make them similar in a sense. And I made a small table covering that. So what are the differences and what are the similarities between Kazakhstan and Tatarstan? First of all, both nations are Turkic, so they're Turkic speaking. And they're both Muslim, Sunni Muslim mostly. Kazakhstan got the independence after the collapse of Soviet Union in 1991. Tatarstan got sovereignty, how you call it, but it not became independent, and that's a separate topic to discuss, why it did not become independent. But I want to focus on it because they had kind of similar situation in terms of languages. So the population of Kazakhstan increased a lot in the past 30 years after the independence. Not a lot, but to some extent, actually considering the fact of the mass migration out of Kazakhstan. So it increased from 16.5 million to 19.1 million. In Tatarstan, it increased slightly. Yeah, not to a very high extent. But if we look at ethnic population of Kazakhs and Tatars, how did it change? In Kazakhstan, it changed drastically. What's an interesting fact about Kazakhstan? Kazakhstan was the only post-Soviet country that after the collapse of Soviet Union, where the Kazakhs were the minority. So not other countries, not Ukraine, not Georgia, not Armenia, but Kazakhstan. Imagine being an independent country and being the minority within your country. And among that minority, not that high percent of population could actually speak Kazakh, because by that time it was very Russian speaking. In Tatarstan, it increased a little from 48% to 53%. So not a drastic change, but still I would say they are the majority for now. But in that sense, there was no real change. Then regarding the constitution. So what is the state language? In Kazakhstan, it's Kazakh. In Tatarstan, it's Tatar and Russian. When we say in Kazakhstan, it's Kazakh, it's very sensitive topic also, because many people say язык межнационального общения в Казахстане русский. Because of like such a big ethnic mix and such a huge population of Russians, they would say that this is the language of inter-ethnic speaking. But constitutionally wise, it's not considered as a state language. And it doesn't really have any special status, but it can be used on the same level as Kazakh when you submit your taxes, when you submit your documents, and still lots of documentation, of course, is in Kazakh, and the transition went really slow at one point. Now it goes a little bit quicker. Then about school education. So in which languages can you go? When I say here school education, I don't mean which languages you can learn, because of course there are many languages you can learn at schools. Here I mean which subjects, where you can get the full aspects of the language. So like physics in the language, math, English, history, all the subjects. So in Kazakhstan, it's mostly Kazakh and Russian, and also Uzbek and Uyghur. Because Uyghurs are living very compactly in Almaty region, so there are Uyghur schools, and Uzbeks are living mostly in the south. Now it's called Turkestan region. It's where I'm from. For example, in my hometown, there were 2 Russian schools and 2 Uzbek schools, and the rest were Kazakh schools. However, when we talk about Uzbeks and Uyghurs, they have to do the state exams in either, like, they have to choose Kazakh or Russian. There were also Tajik schools, but I think because they did not have enough teachers to teach, they changed them to Kazakh schools. In Tatarstan, you can kind of get education in Russian Tatar. In Russian for sure, but Tatar is questionable because it changed within years. I will talk on that more. Now I just want to mention it. And I put the question mark there because it's a sensitive topic and it changed a lot in the last 10 years at least. And the last thing is the official status of Kazakh language. It's in Kazakhstan and China because the population of Kazakhs in China is 2 million people. And in the Xinjiang region and in East Turkestan, and official status of Tatar language is in Tatarstan, also in China, because there is also Tatar population within China, also in Xinjiang, and also it has official status in Poland as a minority language because of the Tatar minorities that are living there. So yeah, now let's move. What was the Rusification poetics? Why are we talking today about Tatar and Kazakh, and why are we in the state that we are right now? I put many words here, but I don't want you really to read that. It's more to see the numbers. So here I concentrated more on Kazakhstan because you heard a lot last time from Ilshad on Tatarstan. And in Kazakhstan, I don't know how much you know about the history of Kazakhstan, but the transition of Kazakhstan becoming a colony of Russia was quite an extended period. It started from the point when one of the Khans of Kazakhstan, of Mladshy Kshujus, so one of the parts of Kazakhstan, modern Kazakhstan, he signed an agreement with Russian Empire about being protected by them and about poddanstvo, as it would be called in Russian. And then it kind of went further up to the point when the Russian Empire conquered the cities of Turkestan region. So the Turkestan, Tashkent, all those south cities that are present right now in the territory of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So yeah, I don't want to talk a lot about the history, but I want to talk a little more. Why did we get to the point that Kazakhs were the minority within their own country in 1991? Because the number 39% is like really low. So it started a lot with the famine, Great Famine in 30s, when 1 million of Kazakhs died. And a lot of them migrated to China, to Afghanistan, to Iran because of the famine and because of the revolution also previously. Russia moved lots of Slavic people from Western Russia to Kazakhstan because imagine it was like a land of nomads. So Russians would think that it's free land. We can grow so much stuff here. While Kazakhs would use this land for nomadism, so they would migrate with the cows, with the horses, and they did not have fences at all. So Russian Empire, Russian government would take some lands from them and give it to Christiania of Slavic nations. So those would be from Ukraine, from Western Russia, and here it states the number 250,000 were moved for that reason at some point. then during the Soviet times, also lots of people were inspired in a sense and were motivated to move to Kazakh SSSR because it would be promoted as uninhabited land to go and achieve huge goals. Yeah, for example, Tselina, it's a huge topic, right? Why so many people moved to Tselina to herb those lands? The other point is deportation. So if we start to list the ethnic groups that were deported to Kazakhstan, it becomes crazy. Right now in Kazakhstan, it's 135 different ethnic groups living who speak more than 30 languages. But most groups would be Germans, Greeks, some Chechens, also Kabardin-Balkars, Crimean Tatars, but they're mostly moved to Uzbekistan. So yeah, it would create this huge mix of those people. And that would also, of course, affect the fact that Kazakhs would become a minority. Also, yeah, what else can we mention here? So there are all those reasons by just making Kazakhs as minority in their own country. Next one would be the Rusification Poetics. So making people speaking Russian. How would you make it? Because at that point, the Kazakh population was not that many people would get opportunity to get education. So they were mostly just speaking Kazakh. And yeah, and I first want to mention the politics of Korenizatsiya. If anybody knows what is that, it lasted for around 10 years. And it was kind of a brilliant time when we now discuss the minority languages, not minority languages, the languages of Russia and the languages of Central Asia, because at that time, Soviets, they put lots of efforts to build the state system, the education system in the local languages. So, for example, in Kazakhstan, they would not just make all the documentation in Kazakh. At some point, they realized, why do we have more Slavic people living in some particular regions? So, and they wanted to get some, I don't know, to make those local people, Kazakh people, more attracted to the Soviet policies. So they started taking lands from those Slavic people living who took lands previously from Kazakhs, and they started to giving them away to Kazakhs to reach 50-50 distribution. Secondly, in the governance, so on the positions of people ruling, they would try to choose those ethnic so-called minorities that they would say, but not minorities, but ethnic representatives. So they would try to search for Kazakhs. In Tatarstan, it would be Tatars. In Bashkortostan, Bashkirs. And yeah, and they would actually invest a lot in institutional usage of Kazakh and Tatar also, if we say about Tatarstan. Yeah, and universities and education in general. And they would actually try to force local non-ethnically, not non-Kazakhs to learn Kazakh, but it would fail at one point. But after that, Stalin decided, oh no, this politics leads to nationalism. So they called it, so they started to do this Korenizatsiya to fight Великорусский chauvinism, but then they ended up into what they called bourgeoisie nationalism, because people would get more, I don't know, more power, those ethnic groups, and they would think, but maybe we should rule more, maybe we should have more independence. And so this program was stopped. And those people who were raised in this program, who were kind of leading this program, they were repressed and all расстреляны, yeah, or sent to Siberia. Yeah, and also in the beginning of this program, they struggled a lot because before that they killed, they repressed all those linguists of Kazakh language that they had before. And that's also the problem. That's what the problem that they faced. And after that, they had many policies changing up to the point when you could not really get education in Kazakhstan, in Kazakh USSR. You could get it, but its quality would be really bad. And its quality would be really bad, so it would be considered by people, and they would be only in very agricultural places, so in the regions just populated by Kazakhs, if they were some. And then we have this situation in Kazakhstan, right? Let me just stay here. In 1991, Kazakhs are ethnic minority within their country, and education-wise, Kazakh education is considered to be something taking you back. So if you send your child to Kazakh school, then this child will not get the same level of education as this child would get in a Russian school. And parents would send their children to Kazakh schools only if they did not have any other option. And very often in those Kazakh schools, they still would use Russian if it's not like South Kazakhstan. Then Kazakhstan ended up in this state and started to think what we should do to improve the situation because we're an independent country. We should do something. And also another fun fact is that Kazakhstan was the last country to leave Soviet Union. Like Kazakhstan didn't want to leave Soviet Union, and at one point it was just Soviet Union and Kazakhstan, so Kazakhstan was the whole Soviet Union. So Kazakhstan started to introduce new policies after the independence, and as it would be called now, the Kazakhification Poetics, Kazakhification, and up to the point when число детских дошкольных организаций на казахском в 2000 году оно не превышало 25%. So in 2000, only 25% of all kindergartens would be in Kazakh, which is really bad because, of course, the children, they learn the language at the early stage. And by 2009, we already see the change that 61% of Kazakh schools are in Kazakh and 48%. 61% is in Russian, I believe. Yeah, it's in Russian, and 48% it's in Kazakh. It's different numbers because sometimes it's mixed. So sometimes you have a mix of Russian and Kazakh. That's why we have different numbers. Yeah, and now I will talk a little more on the Kazakhification poetics of Kazakhification. So what is it? How it is defined? What is Kazakhification? If Rusification, we know what is it. In a sense, by the definition, it's trying to make people speak Russian. Then Kazakhification, it's same, but it also includes to the high extent the national identity building. And yeah, here I just took a definition of it. So Kazakhification is interpreted as an introduction of Kazakh language in the spheres with dominance of Russian. So you kind of force Kazakh language into the Russian dominance. You take it and you say speak Kazakh, and those elimination or significance reduce in the application of Russian. Yeah. And the other person, Renata Matushkevich, she pointed out that Kazakhification was the progress of ascendance of Kazakhs as a national group on the expense of other national groups, mainly Russians. And this is the context that people actually use a lot in Kazakhstan. Taking Kazakhification as something that is against Russians. Yeah, because here you see it's clearly written on the expense of other national groups, mainly Russians. And it is true in a sense, I would say, but at the same time, I would say it's not true, but you we can discuss it later because I'm not going to go into discussions right now. I'm just want to give some facts. So Kazakh right now is the only state language. That's what Kazakhstan government did in 1991. They also created a huge ethnic shift from 40% to 69%. That's huge in 30 years. That's a lot. How did it happen? Here in the table, I hope you see the numbers. You see how it increases. And if you look at different ethnic groups, then you see that actually Turkic nations, such as Kazakhs, Uyghurs, not including Tatars, though the Uzbeks, they increase in numbers, while Slavic nations or European nations, such as Russians, Ukrainians, Germans, they decrease. And some of them decrease drastically, such as Germans, for example. Yeah, now you can have your education on all levels in Kazakh. So you can go to kindergarten, to school, you do bachelor's, master's, PhD. You can all do that in Kazakh. The other question is quality. How good is it? Because as you remember, I said in 1991, or in coming from the Soviet times, the quality of education in Kazakh would be really bad, or at least it would be taken by people in really bad. Do we have the teachers who are able to teach in Kazakh? Do we have the books? And it was a huge struggle for Kazakhstan. And I don't think it's solved by now, but it progressed a lot in a sense. And how Kazakh language is taught at schools is also questionable. And again, coming to the region aspect of it. So I'm from South Kazakhstan. I'm from South Kazakhstan, and I first went to Russian school, and then I went to Russian Kazakh school. So I would get all of the subjects in Russian, and we would also have classes. The other classes would get that in Kazakh, and it would be within one school. But the quality of teaching Kazakh, even in the south, where it's mostly Kazakh speaking and you have the environment, it would be really bad because you learn Kazakh in Russian schools by the books which teach you nonsense. Like they teach you nothing really. They up to the 10th grade, sometimes they just give you small text that you have to kind of rephrase and say to the teacher. That's why a huge population of Kazakhstan that go to Russian schools, they don't learn Kazakh. So I wouldn't say I learned Kazakh in there. And then when I moved to another school, Russian Kazakh, there we used books for Kazakh that are used by Kazakhs, by Kazakh schools. And it changed, of course, it's much more different. So yeah, and it's up till now. So in Kazakhstan, the books that are used in Russian-speaking schools, they are not good. And they are not kind of supposed to make, they're not supposed to make people learn it in a sense. And it is also connected to Tatarstan. And if I don't talk on that, remind me. Then in Kazakhstan, they started introducing trilingual education. So it's a national policy. They tried to move there. So what is trilingual education? It's kind of, I subjectively consider it as something like perfect in a sense, because there you have English, Russian, and Kazakh. There you would get all the scientific subjects in Kazakh, in English. You would study Kazakh literature, history of Kazakhstan in Kazakh, and you would study Russian literature, history of the world in Russian. And some humanitarian subjects are also in Russian Kazakh, and the rest is in English. And they had this huge goal of making the transition of the whole education system into this trilingual education, but there was also opposition of Kazakhs, like Kazakh nationalistic movement, saying that Russian and English, they would kill Kazakh. If we don't have the whole education in Kazakh, then they would kind of suppress Kazakh itself. Yeah. Then next is switching to Latin alphabet. Yeah, Kazakhstan is still transitioning to Latin alphabet, and it's going for the last, I don't know how many years. They changed many different types of alphabet, but it's still kind of, they're trying to raise the prestige of language to attract people from outside of Kazakhstan for whom it could be difficult to learn Cyrillic. So for them, it would be more convenient to use Latin alphabet, for example. Just recently, they introduced also Kazakh subtitles in the cinemas. So all the movies now have to have Kazakh subtitles, but before they would be just in Russian. And as you could think, because of that, lots of initially speaking Kazakh population would easily learn Russian because they just have to. And yeah, building national politics towards building a new unified identity. And that's a whole separate lecture, I would say, but I will still talk on that. So what to do with all those non-ethnic, non-Kazakh people living in Kazakhstan and how to force them to learn Kazakh? That's kind of a question. If with Kazakhs you can use the paradigm and say you have to learn Kazakh because you're Kazakh. It's your mother tongue. It's the language of your ancestors. Even though it doesn't work this way, of course, especially in Kazakhstan. Then with other non-Kazakhs, they do a different thing. So in Kazakhstan, there are many non-Kazakhs who actually speak Kazakh. And this number is increasing within years, of course, because the population of Kazakhs is increasing. There are many non-Kazakhs who live in the regions where there are just Kazakh speaking around them. Kazakhs, there are many who were adopted by Kazakh families. And government and the state TV, they use that a lot to promote Kazakh. So they show those people on TV or on YouTube or on social media, and these people, they benefit from it, of course, also. And you can see this kind of, I don't know, titles, как русская Татьяна стала кумиром казахов. Or литовский музыкант учит детей петь казахские песни. Or немецкая бабушка говорит свободно на казахском. And there are many of those videos, and it's interesting to see to which extent it's used. And I tried to analyze it a little. So first of all, it raises prestige in a sense. If you've seen like what I showed before, they use mostly European looking people. They don't use Uzbeks or Uyghurs or Koreans who speak Kazakh because there are many of them, but they just show either Slavic people or just European looking people who speak Kazakh. And they would sometimes relate to them as Oros people. So either it's Lithuanian or it's German. In one of the videos, there was half Tatar, half German. They would still call Oros Odbasa, so the family of Russians. And it's interesting, right? It's also interesting how Western-oriented still Kazakhstan is, being in Central Asia. Of course, it's not a big of surprise, but yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah, and how those people also benefit from it. They work on state TV. They work in the government. So government is using them also to kind of show others the example of those good people who learned actually Kazakh. But mostly I watched all of those videos because like this topic attracts me a lot. How do they build the image of it? And very often those non-Kazakhs.
We got a question in the chat. What does Oris mean?
Oros means Russian. So it's just Russian, sorry. Yeah, and if you have short questions that I can answer quickly, feel free to ask. So yeah.
Marcel, excuse me. I use this opportunity to ask you how long you think you will still speak. It's extremely interesting, but I see that you have 37 slides and you're at 14 slide, and we're now at 8:30. So I just ask you because it will be very important for us also to discuss.
Yeah, of course.
Something like 9 o'clock. Just think about it, okay? Oh.
What time should I finish so that I can?
Well, basically, we have 1 hour, which is over now, and then half an hour discussion. I think if you have another 10 minutes or so, we expand, but
okay,
if possible, not longer. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, this topic is really interesting for me. That's why I talk so much about it. But I tried to keep it a little shorter. Yeah, and those non-Kazakh speakers, they benefit a lot from that. So they work in the government, they work in the TV, and they also give this wow effect to people around them because they're actually admired by ethnic Kazakhs. But in the South Kazakhstan region, where it's not very surprising when people speak Kazakh, for example, if I speak Kazakh on the street, no one will be surprised. It's just normal. And if you meet a Russian person there who speaks Russian, it's completely like a normal thing. And the negative aspect is that many people use that in the context that look, this person is Russian and he speaks Kazakh, and you Kazakh, you don't speak Kazakh. And that humiliates, of course, the Kazakh person, and it brings this additional feeling of being, I don't know, left out from the community of Kazakh-speaking people. Now, let's move again at the state mechanism. So Kazakhstan is trying to build this identity of being Kazakh or Kazakhstani. Kazakhstani means the citizen of Kazakhstan, and Kazakh means the ethnically you're Kazakh. And also there are Oros people. And by Oros, you don't just call Russians, as it translated literally Russian, but you would also call all European-looking people, Russian-speaking people, you would just say Oros. And it can be actually used as a slur. So as a slur when you wanna, or as a slur or as something not very good, when you see a Russian-speaking Kazakh. So some people can use it in that sense. Yeah, and Kazakhstan does a lot on changing that identity-wise interpretation of who we are, Kazakhs or Kazakhstanis. Also, working a lot on the representation of Russia in the history of Kazakhstan. So Russia is not just considered as an ally state, but we actually learn about, we do learn a lot about the conquest of Central Asia, and it is called conquest. Yeah. I would show this video, but we don't have time. But it's basically people of all ethnic groups of Kazakhstan speaking Kazakh. And just one interesting thing to mention is that many of them say, I'm Latvian, but minin juregim Kazakh. So they say I'm Latvian, but my heart is Kazakh. And it's very often that they use that, and Kazakhs, they have lots of tribes, and sometimes they also say, I'm Russian, but inside I'm Naiman. So they choose those tribes also, and it's quite interesting to study. Yeah, and also in the war context, it influenced a lot. So the situation with the war of Russia having war in Ukraine, Russian Kazakhs, Kazakh Russians, they united Kazakhstani Russians, and they created a flash mob of Kazakhstan meaning Jeruyuk. Jeruyuk is a spring, and they basically they say there, we are Russians of Kazakhstan, we don't want to be saved by Russia. We separate ourselves from that. We don't want to be a part of it. But there is a huge debate on who we are Kazakhs or Kazakhstanis, because you can imagine how difficult it is for Kazakhs who are in the stage of raising nationalism as a state that just became independent 30 years ago, as all those deported nations, all those people who moved for some reason to Kazakhstan, all those born in Kazakhstan, who we are. Are we Kazakhs? Are we Kazakhstanis? What define you as Kazakh or Kazakhstani? Can we just blend this into one term, just saying that we are Kazakhs? Because Kazakhs can get offended if a person, I don't know, if a Russian person would start calling him or her Kazakh. That's a very interesting thing, yeah. And also there was to see the government policies. There was a person who organized Языковые патрули. So he would go in public places in Kazakhstan, so to the shops, etc. And he would start speaking Kazakh. And people would not understand or not talk to him in Kazakh, and he would make a scandal. And he was very extreme in that sense. He would make people apologize so that because they don't speak Kazakh, and it became very famous. And Russia state reacted to that, and they call it Rusophobia, and they said that this person should face consequences. And this person left Kazakhstan to Georgia. My role in that, who am I? Because I'm also considered as a Kazakh language activist, right? Or Tatar language activist. And at one point I was called by Russian TV Rusophobe. And they made a whole program about me, like 15 minutes, analyzing who am I. And it was very funny to see them, how controversy I am for them, because I'm Russian Tatar living in Kazakhstan who advocates for Kazakh language and who is openly gay. And they were so confused with it because they did not know how to treat me. And we can talk about it later. And I can describe explain you the reasons why I was called Rusophobe. Because it was also very funny. Then examples of decolonization of language. Of course, the ethnonyms were changed a lot in Kazakhstan. Semipalatinsk to Semey, Chimkent to Shymkent, changing the phonetics. Also, Kazakhstan itself, why I'm using here everywhere Kazakhstan, not with H, but I'm just saying Kazakhstan, because the English name that we have, Kazakhstan, it's actually written with the phonetics rules of Russian. So how Kazakhstan is written in Russia? In Russian, it's written Kazakhstan, while in Kazakh we have the same letters K, Kazakhstan. So in English, it should be written Kazakhstan this way. That's why, yeah, I'm just giving it as an example. It also concerns the alphabet, the curse words. So there is one curse word, it's called mambet, and the Russians would use it to call it Kazakhs who are not very educated, who don't speak good Russian. And now this term transferred into this regular uneducated person thing, curse word in Kazakhstan. And now people try to eliminate it because it's considered as a colonizer's word because it was used primarily towards Kazakhs. And also the names, because original Turkic names that were changed kind of to the Russian phonetics, to making Asel into Asela, Anel into Anela, Chingiz into Shingis into Chingiz. Yeah, there are many organizations who are working on that. You can see some memes that are represented here, and it's quite cool because these people are sponsored by themselves. Then I want to mention a little on the exotification. So you see a man, I don't know if you know who this is, because these are Uyghurs, and these are Uyghurs from Xinjiang region. And I downloaded this video just today from TikTok. And this is Chinese state propaganda. So because of the Uyghur camps that are located right now in Xinjiang region, they try to build the image of happy Uyghurs who are living their ethnically happy life, and they try to project this image on social media, showing them in their ethnic clothes, singing their songs, and being so happy, being in the state of China. Soviets kind of did the same. So they took the ethnic image of Tatars and Kazakhs and whoever they are. They simplified a lot the costumes, for example. And here you see how they simplified the Kazakh costume on the left and Tatar on the right. They used cheap fabrics that was available and just separated the image of the Soviet citizen and the ethnic representative. And this is how Tatars would look actually. Yeah, and this is how Kazakhs would look. And these are some examples on decolonized fashion that are existent right now. These are examples taken from Tatarstan and Chuvassia. These are great artists that are working a lot with fashion, kind of rethinking the approach that we take to the ethnic costumes within our considerations. Yeah, I would ask these questions, but let's ask them later. And last thing I want to talk about a little is Tatarstan and the 2017 law that we have. Here you can see just the progress of I don't know, of Russian and Tatarstan integration within Russia from the conquest up to 2022. So here, I don't know, let me just quickly explain 30 seconds. Abi Pacha is Yekaterina, the greatest. That's how Tatars would call her, because she kind of made the soft regime in Tatarstan, and she allowed the mosques in Tatarstan, so they really liked her. Then in the Soviet times, Tatarstan had kind of same story with Kazakhstan. There was Karenization, and there was the uprising in the 90s when Tatarstan had this hope of becoming an independent state. And president of Tatarstan would be considered as president of all Tatars, not just Tatars living in Tatarstan, but just all Tatars around the world. And that's kind of an image that is present even right now, but it's changing a lot. In 2022, president of Tatarstan is not called president anymore. And that's kind of, I don't know, one of the saddest things, not one of the saddest thing, like it's kind of like this tip on the iceberg. And about Tatar language, yeah, that's probably the last important thing I want to talk about. Is the law of 2017. So in 90s, with the uprising of the Tatar nation, of this hope of independence, there was also uprising in the education, in Tatar education, and many people are doing great projects right now in Tatarstan that got education in those 90s. But slightly modern Russia, they started to change their policies. So in 1999, Tatarstan started to change the alphabet to Latin alphabet, and it was forbidden by Putin's law, making all languages of Russian Federation, like making them all being using Cyrillic alphabet. That's why Karelian language is not a state language right now in Karelia, for example, because they refuse to use Latin alphabet, or not Latin alphabet. In 2017, Tatar is not mandatory anymore to learn at schools. What I don't know, I cannot squeeze it in 30 seconds. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I will just finish with it. Why did it happen? It happened, shortly saying, because some of the Russian-speaking, not Russian, but Russian-speaking parents, they didn't want their children to learn Tatar anymore, to have it as an obligatory subject at schools. So they wrote a lot of letters to Putin, and Putin said, of course, let people decide which language do they want, but Russian is a state language, so Russian will be taught everywhere. But it's not just, it became not mandatory anymore. It's just the amount of hours reduced to 2 hours per week, while Russian is taught 7 hours per week, I believe. And the educational system, whole education system, the subject system in Tatarstan, it kind of got eliminated also, because now they need to have additional approval to have subject books in Tatar from the Ministry of Education of Russia, Federal Ministry of Education, and they cannot get this approval for like the last many years, 5 years, because they just don't have specialists in the Federal Ministry of Education in Russia to approve those books which are in Tatar. So in Tatar schools, officially they have to use Russian books, and there are not many Tatar schools left. And the Tatar books, the same ones, just the translation ones, they use as a пособие, like not the official material. Yeah, and let's end it with this image of Albert Razin. It's Udmurt activist who burned himself in Udmurtia. Because he advocated for this elimination of 2017 law. And he said that it's a death to the languages of Russia, which it is. Yeah, I would talk much more on it, but I guess I will end it with this. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, Marcel, thank you very, very much for this incredibly dense and expansive, huge topic you introduced here for us. It's good that we still have, I think we should have at least half hour for a discussion. What was really new to me is we had a focus on Russian Germans from Kazakhstan. I think until 10 years ago, we had maybe 95% our students were Russian Germans, and most of them were born in Kazakhstan, until 10 years ago. But to see this incredible multi-ethnic mix with people deported from this is really a revelation to me that makes me look differently at Kazakhstan. But I don't want to talk about myself. I welcome all these guests who come here, and I invite people for the discussion. Sie können entweder Ihre Hand heben oder das einfach sprechen, so we can really give opportunity to ask questions. So if you ask, wenn Sie fragen, bitte unmute yourself, Russian, English or German. Hier ist die erste Frage von Camille.
Thank you so much, Marsel, for your presentation. It was so incredible. We know each other a lot, but still, I mean, a lot to learn. So I have a very controversial question. Maybe it's just like came to my mind when you spoke about the Kazakh as the only one state language in Kazakhstan. So I was thinking about the Ukrainian, which is the only one state language in Ukraine, which is kind of a very, very big problem for the Russian government that they have only one state language. So I also saw a lot of videos, which you presented also in your presentations, that the Kazakhs, Russians, they don't want to be protected by another government and so. And I watched some videos as well. So there is also a myth. I just comparing right now the Ukraine and Kazakhstan because, like, for me it's very important so that we don't have this big war again. Maybe probably against Kazakhstan now someday. And there was a big myth like during the 20 last years in Ukraine that in Ukraine we have a lot of Bandera people and so on. Is there a special person in Kazakhstan which kind of like a face for the nationalists movement and so? Like in Bashkortostan would be probably Zaki Velidi or Salavat Yulayev. Is there some special person in which is controversial in Kazakhstan?
I wouldn't say there is a special person because Kazakhstan tries, like the government does a lot to not end up in Russophobia, as they would say, to not end up in the nationalistic movement, because nationalistic thoughts are also considered not as good in Kazakhstan by the local state. And the difference with the Ukraine about the state language is that in Ukraine, even though people, not that, I don't know the percentage of people who speak Ukrainian, but they still understand it. While in Kazakhstan, no, they don't understand. And the problem is that Kazakh becoming a state language also eliminated lots of non-Kazakh speakers from the government, and non-ethnic Kazakhs, if you see them of their representation in the government, it's like not many people. And yeah, that's also what made lots of people to migrate out of Kazakhstan, including Russians, for example, who are still moving to from North Kazakhstan to Russia. Not only economical reasons, of course. And I understand that, but at the same time, yeah, you kind of eliminate one part of the country from the participation in it, although they do their best to make it bilingual. But there is such a huge population that don't speak Kazakh at all, like they don't even understand. Yeah.
Thank you. There is another question by Mirate, another guest.
Yeah, thank you, Marcel. And honestly, I would listen to you 1 more hour at least. And I'm really sorry that we have no more time. And I would ask you also maybe some kind of, question. I have my own opinion about it, but I'm interested to hear from you. What do you think about it? We all know, but it's, sorry, my cat. It's the time then many Russian people migrates to Central Asia right now, and it's kind of, history repeats itself, as you said earlier about the Rusification of Kazakhstan. It was also the process of migration. Yeah, Russian people who fled because of repression and all of the stuff. And how do you feel about it? Like, is it in some sense a risk of new wave of Russification of Central Asia? Because recently I was listening about a research which some people did in Armenia and Georgia, and they speak to Russian immigrants, and they mostly don't want to learn language like Armenian or so I think the same situation right now in Kazakhstan also, and in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, anyway.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, really many people moved to Kazakhstan, but still the numbers are not so big because I looked at the numbers. And in Kazakhstan, you don't really feel that much of that as in Georgia or Armenia, because those people move mostly to big cities such as Astana and Almaty, and the population of Russian-looking people is already quite huge. Of course, you can distinguish between Russian from Kazakhstan and Russian from Moscow if you try good enough. But in general, I would say it doesn't like appear in your eyes. The second thing, is there a fear of Russification? I would say it appears on Russian media. No, not on Russian media, on Kazakh media sometimes, but Kazakhstan is Russified so much. Like you can't imagine. It's like it's such a Russian-speaking country, especially if we talk about big cities. If you come to Astana or Almaty, it's pretty much Russian-speaking. Even now, it's getting more bilingual, I would say, but still, the default language that people use is Russian. In many cases, especially if you are a Russian-looking person. Then about learning local language, I would say that they actually do try to learn. And because now I was going to talk about that later in my lecture, but there is a tendency of decolonization, because my second part was on decolonization, and there is a tendency on that. It's becoming kind of like people who move to Kazakhstan are to a high extent those liberal people who are escaping the governance of Russia, and for them it's becoming trendy. Yeah, it's becoming trendy to be decolonized. So they talk about decolonization, not very accurately, many times, because in Kazakhstan there was also scandal on that, because they started to kind of exotify the local culture also. And Kazakhs, they react to that very aggressively, yeah, at least in social media. But no, I don't see the fear. I just see good sides of that, because more people, more specialized people coming to Kazakhstan, good for us.
Thank you.
I put myself on the list. Marcel, I have two questions. One is just acting up on the one that was just talked about. Do you have any figures of people, intellectuals from Russia migrating to Kazakhstan after the war in Ukraine? I mean, this I haven't looked at. You know, it's usually it's the Caucasus where all the people go. This is one question. The other question is, what happened to that trilingualism? In 2016, I went to Almaty to accredit new study systems, and it was in full bloom that now, in a couple of years, Kazakhstan will be trilingual. You mentioned the beginning of it, but how is it now?
Yeah, about the intellectuals moving to Kazakhstan, I just can say my personal numbers, the people I know, so you can't calculate that, of course, but I would say there are quite many, and some of them, they take Kazakhstan as a transit point, and then they move somewhere else until they get the opportunity to move to Europe, because still Kazakhstan is pretty much marginalized, even among liberal community of Russia. They take it as an Asia, as something outdated, something not very attractive to go to. Yes, but many bloggers moved to Kazakhstan, which is funny. So economically wise, yeah, like you can see TikTok accounts, they started to make music in Kazakh even. So to make people attracted to them, I guess, to, I don't know, get some additional audience from Kazakhstan. But and what is interesting, Nazarbayev University, my alma mater, it gave official proposal to researchers from Russia to give them like places to come to them if they want to. Yeah, I saw this kind of posts. And the second question was on trilingual education. It started already in 90s, actually, from Kazakh Turkish lyceums, where they would study in 4 languages. They would study in Kazakh, Turkish, Russian, and English. And it would work very well, because among current government, or like current people who are in power, we have a lot of graduates from there. And we have also Nazarbayev intellectual schools, which are great to my own opinion, and they give education in 3 languages, in English, Kazakh, and Russian. And graduates from there go to study to Harvard, like this Ivy League universities. And the question is that, do they return though? And it's another question. And also another interesting thing that I observed and noticed as I studied at Nazarbayev University, and also I know lots of people from Nazarbayev intellectual schools, that percentage of ethnic minorities in those schools, it's very low. Like it's mostly Kazakhs who go to those schools. And I don't know what are the reasons for that. And I think it's a very interesting topic for the research. And I would love to research that. Yeah, but in regular schools, this system, it doesn't work, because they don't have teachers who could study. They did force some teachers to, like young teachers, to start to do, I don't know how it's called, to get some kind of re-educational and get additional courses and start teaching physics or math in English. And teachers would actually do that, and like somewhere it works, but it's mostly in big cities. Like in small towns, we have a huge problem with educational system, because all of the teachers who would come from Soviet Union, they're dying slowly. So like the population is changing, and there are not that many people who are willing to be teachers in small towns. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience?
We have a comment in the chat that from Kirill Milutin, that Oxymoron made a song where a part of the lyrics was in Kazakh, and I wanted to comment also what you said before about the TikTokers in Kazakhstan. I am not such an expert of TikTok, but I read somewhere that those TikTok houses where young people gather and make videos, that they are relocating to Kazakhstan, which I found really interesting.
Yeah.
And one more thing, I think your presentation was amazing, and I wanted to ask if we can keep it, if you can send it to us so we can share it in our chat in the forum. And if you maybe could open the last pages so we just see what you wanted to tell us, because it's really interesting.
So yeah, I wanted to move to the topic of Tatarstan and to the law of 2017, because there is a lot to discuss on it and there are many nuances. Then I wanted to talk about Russophobia, give definition in it, and why it's such a big topic right now and why it's non-existent. Why do I think that it does not exist? Yeah. And how did I end up being called Russophobe on Russian state TV, because I think it's funny. Yeah. Then moved to using language as a protest, because it appeared that many ethnic minority groups they used actually from Russia. So I don't call them minority groups, just like languages of Russia. They used those languages as a protest for the war. So that's how they, even though they're not speakers, they might be just regionally related to that, they still use it. And I wanted to give this as an example that it was not just the war that initiated that, but that it was happening before. For example, here, one of Tatar singers, he's singing in Tatar in Kreml, so in Kreml of Kazan, and he's screaming on all the Kreml, saying Azadka Azad, which means the freedom to Azad. And this is Azad Miftakhov, who is the political prisoner in Russia. And yeah, just some examples where the person from Komi, he was talking to police people only in Komi language, asking them, and they could not understand it, of course, when they imprisoned him. And he wanted to court be all in Komi language, and it was his protest, and it was Navalny case when he went on the protest for Navalny. And this is how you use the language as a protest, right? And yeah, and lastly, to talk on queerness, how it's integrated with the Kazakhification right now, actually, how it's working, because it's also interesting, because in our image, we very often consider language activists as someone like, this very nationalistic, very pro-traditional, but in Kazakhstan, we have a different image, and it's very interesting to also analyze. Because people start to rethink the folklore. As you know, like, I just gonna add one fact, Kazakh language is a Turkic language, so there you don't have genders, and very often genders are like just, you can't understand clearly if that person was male or female. So when we look at the folklore, it's often that you can also not know if this a straight couple story or it's a gay couple story. So. And some people do lots of things on it, and they do videos in. They do it in Kazakh, and they add Russian subtitles because we are bilingual. Yeah, and that's my project where I show openly queer people in Kazakhstan, and I also find it really important to integrate the point of being Kazakh speaking or like being ethnic minority language speaking person in Kazakhstan. And yeah, my concluding remarks about this. And I just want to add one fact. Like, as a child, I was very much exposed to many languages, and like being from a small town, I was exposed mostly to Russian, Uzbek, Azerbaijani, and Kazakh. So these are 4 languages that mostly kind of were around me. And it's a different story for every person in Kazakhstan, which is kind of cool. And yeah, that's kind of all. Embrace your identity, learn languages. And yeah. If you want me to give a different presentation on current state of Tatar language for 20 minutes, I can do that.
Well, we may continue this some other time. It is really in the end, in your last remarks, that makes so clear how this is really connected. Your identity, the language, the multitude of language and ethnic groups, the political situation, and then the gender situation.
Yeah.
Remarkably, that you tie it to the grammar, and I'm really impressed by also your, the analytical level of how you go through all this. It's very good. But there's a question by Camille. One more, please, Camille.
Yes, if we still have like a couple of minutes, I want to ask Marsel one question. You mentioned the bloggers who integrate the Kazakh music in their videos so that they popularize, so that they get attention, so to say, from the Kazakhs. So, well, in order to popularize the Tatar language and culture, I remember one YouTube channel, we know each other, this channel, YouTube Tatarechke, who also started to use the Kazakh topics, the Kazakh theme in order to get the attention to their Tatar channel. Yeah. So my question is, like, would you agree with the thesis, with the question that, so in order to popularize the Tatar culture, which is kind of dying right now, the Tatar should more collaborate with Kazakh people more than with the Russians, actually.
Yes, actually, that's my idea, I think, as a language activist, because I do see the future of Tatar in Kazakhstan. And the population of Tatars in Kazakhstan around 200,000 people, which is quite a lot, but their identity is not awoken, I would say. It's just like some people or consider themselves like really Tatars, like in general, they have very strong ethnic identity, but those who live in Kazakhstan, very often they speak Russian and they say like, oh, we are more European, and like they're very whitewashed, I would say. But also, those TikTokers, those singers who try to get attention by making content in Kazakh, very often it's a thin line how you are not exotifying it and not just taking advantage of it, and you're like respecting it and glorifying it in a sense. And some people do that really bad, so they end up in this exotification part. With Tatars, I feel more that future of Tatar language is in Kazakhstan, because languages are very similar, population is huge in Kazakhstan, and I don't know, Kazakhs also like Tatar. And fun fact, in 90s in Kazakhstan, can you imagine, at that time Kazakh state TV in Kazakh was not developed at all. All the Kazakh speaking grandmas, granddads, they would watch Tatar channel 10V. And like, because it's so understandable, the language, so they would watch Tatar, and many of Kazakhs in Kazakhstan, especially old people, they understand and they know some Tatar. So if you speak Tatar in Kazakhstan, that would be like totally fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, so we end on a little bit of a more brighter perspective, even if the whole picture is pretty
it's not dying, it's degrading.
Yeah. So you say contact you. Will you give your email in this maybe presentation, add it, and when you send it to us, that would be really wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any other questions? Well, we don't want to overstretch these. We had sessions that lasted for 2 hours, but there were pretty many people. I'm very glad about this really, really substantial talk. And Hasmik, Dankeschön, Hasmik, für diesen Gast, für diese Einladung. And maybe we, stay in touch. Are you aware of the Alexei Getman, a Russian German from Kazakhstan who also taught at our faculty, and he did a documentary film on gay people in Kazakhstan? If not, then we should give this to you, because I hear from Hasmik that the guests cannot read the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did he do it in 90s or like early 2000s?
No. Stefan, when did it?
The film was made in 2013, and it's in Russian with German subtitles.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice. It would be curious to see.
Oh yeah, and the way it was made, the whole process was an interesting story. So he's a Russian German who went back and did another documentary film about this, sort of his first one, and Alexei Goes Kazakhstan. Yeah, and then the film about gay, because he's gay, and then the whole encounter with this culture and with himself returning there. So there are more things to add.
Yeah, and German wise, there is a big, not study. I mean, there is like an activist, German activist. She's located in Russia, and she's studying all the dialects of those Germans, Russo-Deutsche, who are living within Russian region and Kazakhstan region, because they all speak Altdeutsch. And I think she explored all those dialects because this is Altdeutsch, and it's from different regions, so it differs a lot. And it's for me, I think personally, it's also super interesting how it got kind of conserved.
Do you talk about Nina Behrendt?
I don't know, probably. Yes.
The only Russian-German professor of Germanistic who wrote a book about dialects, Russian dialects and island dialects in all the post-Soviet space. Maybe that's her. Okay.
Yeah.
So once more, thank you very much, and please send us your PowerPoint. And sure. I'm glad you went at least briefly through the rest of it. I didn't want to cut you off, but want to give people a chance to ask questions.
Sure.
So all the best to you, and thank you for all the others for attending. Students and colleagues.
Спасибо, Хасан.
Большое спасибо за доклад, Марсель. Мне было очень интересно, и я бы с удовольствием послушала еще. Жаль, что у нас такие ограниченные временные рамки. Спасибо, что ты пришел, нашел время, подготовился так хорошо, и вообще у тебя отличный английский. Это тоже замечание. Спасибо за это все.
Да, не что. Да, я бы еще говорил, не знаю, очень долго, потому что, да, тема интересная. Спасибо.
Хорошо, ну до новых встреч, до свидания.
Пока-пока.
Спасибо.
Ahmet,